Alright guys, welcome back after discussing in one of the last videos, the videos in the top right corner, by the way, if you want to watch it, what are the most fun decks in Master Duel. We will discuss today what are the most beginner-friendly decks, the best deck for beginners, so the easiest decks to learn here. This is what we are going to talk about today. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, hitting the thumbs up and the notification bell, especially the notification bell would help me out a lot, and the algorithm, thank you for that. And once again, disclaimer here, I know that not every deck is on this list right here. Obviously, decks like Blue Eyes and Dark Magician are definitely more beginner friendly decks. I don't have them on here. I just have more meta relevant decks on here, but just to have it out of the way at this moment, a good deck for beginner could be Blue Eyes, and then I think like Dark Magician is more of a beginner friendly deck that is a bit more complicated, but I think that a lot of players that want to start the game will diverge from these basic of basics strategies within the first few play hours and then want to maybe play one of the more meta decks that you can also find on Master Duel Meta, one of the best resources for this game. But now let's start right here. We have a Val Monica, which I argued is one of the most hated decks, at least in my opinion. I just don't like the deck. Then again, it's not a very unfriendly deck. It has a very easy game plan. The combo is easy to learn, and if you start with this deck in the lower tiers, then you definitely with the Baguska on your end board can confuse a lot of opponents that maybe do not know how to out the Baguska, and then I think it's not that easy in terms of how you win over time. So I guess it's somewhere in the mid category. What you want to achieve with this deck, so the basic combo line is easy, but then how to operate with this deck, I think it's a lot harder. Then we have Tearlaments, and Tearlament is definitely not a beginner friendly deck. It's a complicated one, especially now with all the other engines that you are running in this deck. You have to decide on a lot of different options. You have to decide what to fusion summon when, on your opponent's turn, on your own turn. This is definitely not easy. There is not one single combo line that you can learn right here and master this deck. So not a deck for beginner, as well as Branded Despia, one of the first decks that I played when re-entering the game. But this was back in the day when Branded Despia was more like simple, where we didn't have stuff like Quem or Cartesia, which definitely made the deck more complicated. And then I switched because I wasn't really successful with this deck over to Sword Soul and was more successful with Sword Soul in the beginning. Spoiler alert, one of the most easy and beginner-friendly decks ever, but we will come to this in a moment. And yeah, Brand Despia, even though it's a very cool deck, it's also very expensive in the beginning, and it's definitely not a beginner friendly. The combo lines there are no like single combo lines that you can learn. You can learn the Branded Fusion combo line, I guess, but then you really have to react with a lot of like soft interruptions, like no Baron de Fleur, just Omni Negate interruption there, where you can just like negate something completely, but you have to really point your interruptions at the right cards of your opponent. So you also have to understand your opponent's deck very well in order to use Branded Despia effectively, so this is not easy. Then we have Infernomalite, which in my opinion is kind of a mid deck. You have very long combo lines that you have to learn, so it's definitely not beginner friendly. But then if you can master your combo lines and end up on your end board, then you have really strong like Omni Negate-ish negates on your end board that make it quite easy to win the game. What definitely makes the deck less beginner friendly is the fact that killing your opponent when going second is not that easy, so this is definitely not a deck for a beginner. Exorcista, in my opinion, is more beginner friendly, not a complicated deck, no complicated combo lines, can also have a good game plan going second. You can put in stuff like evenly matched, which is pretty easy to use. You just evenly matched and then go with your combo line from there. I think this is more of a beginner friendly one. Definitely not that hard. You can play Shifter in this deck, which can just win you games on its own, and you don't really have to do a lot. You don't really have to decide on a lot of important like decisions, where to stop your opponent. What doesn't make it the best for beginners deck is just the fact that your interruptions, you definitely have to use your interruptions right in order for this to work, but this is one of the more easy decks. Sprite, I would also consider a more beginner friendly deck in comparison to all of these here. It's not that hard to understand how you can like do a lot of damage with Sprite cards. You can also just use Sprite Gamma Burst to make it easier, and then the basic combo line with Sprite is also not that complicated. It's also very strong, a very strong deck, especially in the lower ranks, which is why I think investing into Sprite just for the beginner friendliness this is kind of okay. Then we have Centurion, which I would say is more of a mid deck, definitely more complicated combo lines, but you end up on quite strong like end board bodies, like the Omni Negate, Cosmic Quasar, or Cosmic Blazer Dragon it is, I think. So definitely not super complicated, but then again, this like having your monsters as spell and traps is not like a mechanic that is very like it's not a beginner mechanic, right? You start with normal summons, special summons, and this is already something that you have to understand when you begin in this game. And this just represents a mechanic that is very yeah, unintuitive and very nuanced. So which is why I think this is only a mid complicated deck. Then we have Super Heavy Samurai, which if you learn this combo line, you have a very strong end board with generic boss monsters, and you can also play this combo line going second. So I think this is more beginner friendly, as it's very linear and you end up on a strong end board. You just have to learn the combo lines here, which makes it a bit more beginner-friendly than, for example, Centurion. We have Jubel, one of the most complicated decks in my opinion. A very strong deck that, if you learn the combo line, which is not that hard, you end up on a strong board, but you really have to time your interruptions well, and you also have to understand how to kill your opponent, how to yeah, manage your resources. Not a beginner-friendly deck. We have Chimera, which in my opinion is, I guess, like somewhere in the mid-category. Very linear deck, very linear combos. Yeah, and nothing more to say to this. I guess this is kind of the mid category. Definitely beginner friendly deck, I would say, is Scarecrow. We might in the end have to put some of these up into the best for beginners category, depending on what we put here. Scarecrow is very easy. You just want to get to your boss monster, and then you don't even need to use any interruptions, because your boss monster is like a floodgate, and just keep your boss monsters there, and then that's it. I guess this could end up in the best for beginners category. It is easy, the combo is easy, it's pretty easy to understand how you get to your boss monster, and then you just have to chill on your boss monster and don't need to do anything else. Really good to learn the basics of the game while still have a deck that will be strong in the lower tiers. Then we have Runic, and this is definitely a complicated deck. You have to time everything that you do very well. You have your interruptions in form of negates, in form of destructions, like spell destructions, like special summon destructions. Then you really have to, I mean, okay, you could argue that it's not that complicated, because if you just flip like a skill drain or another floodgate, this could just be game, and that's true. But if we are only talking about how to use the Runic engine, this is definitely not that easy, and also a mechanic that is very unique to Runic, and not one of the basic mechanics of the game, like normal summon and win with boss monsters, right? Then we have Raid Raptor, which is definitely more of a beginner-friendly deck. You have some very straight combo lines that you just have to learn. They are quite long, I have to say, but you can definitely learn them, and you end up on like unaffected boss monsters, which is always very easy for new players. They can just make this boss monster, and a lot of players, especially in the lower ranks, will not know how to deal with this, or don't have any cards in the deck that can help them deal with this. I might even put this up in the best for beginners category, but we'll have to think about this afterwards. Then we have Voiceless Voice, also a very beginner friendly deck, a very easy game plan to follow. It's definitely a bit more complicated if you want to get really good with this deck, because this deck also needs you to manage your resources, especially in a grind game, quite well. Then again, if you just start with this deck and you make your base combo ending up on your boss monster that is an Omni Negate, and also on your barrier that basically says your opponent cannot attack anything else but your boss monster, I think a lot of beginners will struggle in outing a Voiceless Voice board. But then again, going second, this can be quite tricky. You have to understand how to use your resources well, which is why I think this is not the best for beginners category, because going second is just a bit hard with this deck. Then we have Trap Tricks, and I think every deck that relies on traps and spells and stuff like this is more of a complicated one. Relying on traps, especially because you have a lot of different traps that do different things, like disrupt in the hand, destroy, negate, and you really, or maybe Daruma Karma can flip down, and you really have to understand where to place your interruptions in order to play the deck well. So Trap Tricks as well as Labyrinth, just to mention it here, definitely on the complicated side. Labyrinth is more complicated than Trap Tricks in my opinion. It's a very rewarding deck, it's very cool, and you can definitely confuse the players in the lower ranks, they don't know how to deal with this, but yeah, using Labyrinth, especially in comparison to Traptrix, very, very complicated. Then we have Fire King. The pure Fire King variant is definitely more in a mid category here. I would say Fire King Snake Eyes, as well as Snake Eyes, I would put more in the complicated category, because I guess the Snake Eyes you could put in the mid category because you end up on more generic negate monsters like a Bowled Savage Dragon and a Baron de Fleur, whereas in the Snake Eyes Fire King variant, you have a lot of your interruptions in your graveyard. You have to time them correctly. So for example, if you just use your, I don't know, Promethean Princess interruption directly, then you lock yourself out from using your IP Masquerena, putting it from the spell trap zone into the monster zone. So a lot of things to consider. You have to really use your interruptions at the perfect point in order to not sabotage your own game plan. And then you will also, I guess the kill combo, the going second kill combo is very easy to learn, which is definitely something that makes this easier. But then to use this deck optimally, you will also have to learn a few different lines like the Diabellstar line, Snake Eyes line, Poplar line, and so on. So which is why I don't think these decks could be considered beginner friendly. We have Salamangreat, which I guess seems like a beginner friendly deck, but in my opinion is not that easy. It's somewhere here in the mid category. You have a lot of different combo lines that you need to understand. You need to understand how this deck wants to operate. So what you want to summon basically in one turn, you want to like double your Raging Phoenix, you want to double your Sunlight Wolf if you can, and then end up on the ability to summon your Raging Phoenix on your opponent's turn and destroy everything. So definitely something that you need to understand how this deck wants to operate, and it's not that easy. And going second also not super easy, which is why I would put this in the mid category. Then we have Unchained here, which this is tricky, I guess. This is something here in the mid category. You have to learn some combo lines that are quite long, but then again, killing your opponent going second is also not that complicated because you can get a lot of high attack monsters on the board quite quickly, and your interruptions are kind of hard. If you have your Caesar on the board and it can negate special summons, it's just an Omni negate special summon if you want to call it that. But then again, you have your Soul of Rage that goes into an SP Little Knight. You have to time this correctly in order to be successful. So you could also put this in complicated, maybe like not one of the most complicated ones like Tier Elements, Despia or Labyrinth, for example, is, but definitely not the easiest deck. Then we have Mech, which Mech in my opinion could be considered a bit more beginner friendly, as the kill combo going second is not that hard to learn, and your base combo going first also not that hard to learn. Definitely not as easy as is Voiceless Voice or Exorcister, but here on the bottom, and we will arrange this here in a moment, of the easier category, we have Fluon de Reese, which this might seem like a beginner deck, but it is not really. It's something that you also have to time your trap very well when you want to interrupt your opponent. So I guess this is more like this is more of a complicated one, honestly. You really have to understand your engine well, where to time it, and how to play around different hand traps from your opponent that can potentially stop you. Heroes is a deck with it's a combo deck. I would put this in the bottom of the mid category. Definitely a deck that a lot of beginners look at to maybe pick up, because Heroes is a very famous archetype. Then again, I think it's not that easy to pilot, but also not that hard. So as a beginner, you can definitely pick this up, learn the combo lines, and then master this deck over a few games. Same goes for Rika, I would say. Rika has a very long combo line, and I think Manadim could be placed in the same category here. These three here are very combo heavy decks that you just need to learn the combo line and maybe how to alter the combo line if you get interrupted. You need to learn a few different combo lines, and this is therefore something I would put in the mid category. If you compare these two decks that you can find on the bottom here, those decks are definitely less linear than these very linear combo decks, and they also need you to use your interruptions more thoughtfully than these here that end up on more like Omni Negate boss monsters. I guess the Heroes doesn't really, so Heroes I guess is more complicated than these two here. Then we have Pearly, which Pearly is a tough one. I wouldn't call Pearly beginner friendly. Then again, it's not that complicated because you just want to end up on your boss monster, but on the boss monster you will need to really time time your Expert Lenoir spin backs well. So if you spin back the wrong stuff, then your opponent might just kill you. You really need to spin back the important stuff that your opponent plays from the graveyard or from the field, which now that I talk about this, I think this could be considered more of a complicated one just because you need to understand the meta quite well in order to use this Expert Lenoir interruption. You could just sit on your Expert Lenoir, it's unaffected at least, but with the introduction of Sleepy Memory, this will return to the extra deck at the end of the next turn, so you can't really sit on it forever. You have to use the interruptions effectively. Then we have Dragon Link. Dragon Link is a mid deck. It's not as hard as these here, I would say. So it has to get on this list a bit higher here. It's something like Infernoble Knight, I would say, even though it's easier than Infernoble Knight because going second, I think it's easier to use this than it is to use Infernoble Knight. We have Kashtira here, also not that complicated. I would put it somewhere here in the mid category. More easy to learn. You have this basic combo line, and then you have like this interruption of the Fenrir. I guess you need to understand your opponent's deck in order to use the Unicorn interruption effectively. But the combo lines are simple, and going second, this is also very strong and quite intuitive. Then we have Memento, one very linear combo line with like very straightforward monster interruptions, which is why I think this is more of, how do I call this, beginner friendly? This is tough. I would say this is more of a beginner-friendly deck because you have this one combo line that you need to understand, and then it's okay to play this deck. Then we have Vanquish Soul, definitely one of the more complicated ones. You don't have a linear game plan. You have a lot of like soft interruptions that you have to use a perfect timing on to use this deck correctly. Definitely one of the more complicated ones. Then the pendulum decks, I think, are in the mid category, but on the bottom here, so they kind of tend towards the complicated ones. They have very long combo lines, and you also have to understand where you have to go if you get interrupted at specific points. Then we have Rescue Ace, which I think is Rescue Ace. Rescue Ace is more of a beginner-friendly one because your game plan is quite straightforward. You just want to go into your Turbulence. If you combine this with the Snaker engine, this might make it more complicated, and then we will put it here in the mid category. We have Blackwing, a long combo line, and going second, it's just not that strong. So honestly, this is like something here in the beginner-friendly category. You can just learn this combo line, also end up on this unaffected boss monster, which in the lower ranks is definitely effective. And then we have Sword Soul, which yeah, this is no surprise, it is one of the best for beginners decks that you can have. You can also get this for free in the beginning. A very straightforward game plan with hard negates that is easy to make. Going second, it's also not that tough. You can just go into the same game plan that you went going first. And this is, as I already said, the deck that I picked up after Branded Despia and was very successful. Was the first deck I was able to reach Diamond 1 with. Back in the days, there was only Diamond 1. This was the highest rank. So Sword Soul definitely the beginner deck if there was ever one, I would say. So now let's sort them a bit here. I think we'll put Raid Raptor here, and then we can put a Sword Soul. I honestly think that Scarecrow is even easier than Sword Soul because you don't even have to interrupt your opponent. You just sit on your boss monster and do nothing, and your opponent either can out you or he can't, and you don't do anything here, which is also why I think this is not the most interesting deck, but it's definitely an easy deck with a super easy game plan and non-interruption boss monster. Then for beginner friendliness, I would say this is not that bad in terms of how we place it here. I would keep it like this. Here in the mid category, this is easier. Okay, this is then harder. Yeah, Chimera is very easy in my opinion. We could also keep it like this, and then when we come to the complicated category, which is the most complicated ones of these, definitely Tearlaments in my opinion. Tearlaments is very complicated. Stuff like Labyrinth is also, you have to understand the metagame very well in order to play this deck very effectively. Brand Despia, a very complicated deck. Then I would put Jubel here, and we can definitely keep Vanquish Soul right here. Trap Tricks, Fire King, and Pearly can stay here. And yeah, I guess something like this looks kind of right. But let me know in the comments. I'm very interested in your opinion. What do you think are the most beginner-friendly decks? Which deck did you play in the beginning and helped you understand the game? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for being here, and we will see each other in the next one.